What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Bartender. If you know me, you know that I love agile software development, and I love applying agile development principles to the people side of business even more. We're going to learn how to transform your conversations at work using agile principles, and that's going to change everything. We've got Douglas Squirrel on the show today, but you can just call him Squirrel. Want to know more? Stick around. Squirrel's been coding for 40 years, and he's led software teams for 20. He uses the power of conversations to create dramatic productivity gains. He's been CTO in startups from fintech to biotech to music and everything in between. He's consulted on product improvements at over 200 organizations, and he is the author of Agile Conversations. Transform your conversations, transform your culture. Oh, and he lives in Frogholt, England, in a timber-framed cottage built in the year 1450. That's right, 1450. This conversation was a ton of fun, and I think you're going to dig it. So buckle up, TCBers, grab your favorite cocktail, and let's get right on into it with Squirrel on today's TCB.
Welcome to SkyTeam's The Corporate Bartender, where we gather some of the best HR and people leaders to discuss what's happening on the people side of business. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's your favorite day and mine. It's Corporate Bartender Day. It is September 11th. 23 years ago today was a weird day. And it's still a weird day. Every September 11th is a weird day. And it's interesting, too, because as I talk about it, like with my kids who, you know, my oldest was a baby that day. And it's just a history item for them. Mm-hmm. Like they get it. It's important. There's significance there, but it's like learning about any other historical point in time. So it's kind of a weird thing. So September 11th, it is the 207th time that we've gathered this group of amazing people. And today's going to be a good day. We have a guest today, as I like to say. He's the person that you don't recognize in your little Brady Bunch view up there, waving at you. His name is Douglas Squirrel. He goes by Squirrel. I'll tell you about him in just a minute, but he is a coder. He's a tech dude. He's been a coder and a leader of development teams for a long time, and he's written a book about something that is near and dear to my heart, and I can't wait to get into that conversation with you about that idea. Before we do that, though, I need to tell you, normally I would tell you who's upcoming, but the travel gods, they speak. So we're going to be dark for the next 3 weeks, September 18, 25, and 10-2. We are going to be on the road. So I've got a bunch of upcoming business travel. So we will be dark for the next 3 weeks, but then we'll be back sporadically for a few weeks, and then we will round out the year strong. We will stick the landing, as they say. So we did not warn him in the pre-show because what fun is that? But Squirrel, we like to dance on our guests. So let's give Squirrel a good, solid TCB welcome, shall we? And this is where I play the music until the guest dances at least a little bit. There it is.
Fist bump. Nailed it.
That's awesome. All right. I alluded to the fact his name is Douglas Squirrel. He's been coding for 40 years. He's led software teams for 20. And he uses the power of conversations to create dramatic productivity gains in tech organizations of all sizes. So he leverages things that we do in software development on the people side of business. Ruby's going to love this because she knows how much I love Agile. And he wrote a book about it. It's there on your screen. It's called Agile Conversations. Transform your conversations, transform your culture. He's written some other stuff too. He's an accomplished tech fella. And interesting note. He lives in a house in England that was built in 1450.
That's a year, by the way. Sometimes people aren't sure about that. There actually was a year that was numbered 1450. That's when it was built.
It's not a time of day.
This is not that house, by the way. I'm visiting Miami, but if you go to oldkentcottage.com, you can see more pictures than you ever wanted of an ancient house, which I get no credit for building, but am very proud to be a custodian of.
That's fantastic. Well, thanks for being here with us today, Squirrel. Tell us a little bit about your journey, because I imagine when you were a wee baby, you did not say, I am going to grow up to be not only a developer, but a leader of developers, and then I'm going to leverage development technology to make tech organizations better. Tell us about your journey and how you ended up here with us today.
None of that. I thought I was going to be a mathematician for a long, long time. And so I studied at Berkeley and got loads of degrees and all kinds of things like that. But eventually I discovered that really writing code was a lot of fun, and it also paid a heck of a lot better. And I had to get married, so which I hear some people on this broadcast know about how much that costs. So as a young poverty-stricken graduate student, I went and got a job in industry and wrote code and had a lot more fun. And then somebody decided I should be CTO. And I didn't really know what that was or how to do it. But I gave it my best shot and did that for a while in a relatively small company. And then a pattern started to emerge in my jobs, because I got fired from that job. And then I got fired from the next job. And then I got fired from the job after that. And I said, boy, I seem to be good at getting fired.
There's a pattern.
There was definitely a pattern. But the good news was that I was getting fired in this really nice way. So what would happen is somebody like, say, Lori would come along to me and say, Squirrel, you've built this amazing team, and they have these great procedures, and they're really responsive, and you've trained some leaders who are really doing well. And there's just not that much for you to do anymore, we've noticed. And you're kind of expensive. So why don't you go be wonderful somewhere else? And that was really nice. It was gratifying, but also involved going and getting a new job, which I didn't necessarily enjoy all that much. And it kept getting shorter. So the first one took about 10 years, and the second one 2, and the third one 1. And I said, not only am I getting fired, I'm getting fired more often. So then I said, maybe I should just plan for this. And I hear there's some people who kind of intentionally get fired pretty regularly, and those are called consultants. And so maybe I'll go try that. So then I started working more as an interim person, working with a couple clients at once and really being their leader. But I kept getting faster, and I kept getting done quicker and getting fired more quickly. But of course, I planned for it. So that was, and they were happy to get done with me and have the knowledge transferred and have things be better. And so I just kept getting faster and faster. And now I don't do interim work. I do advisory work and coaching and other great things like that. And I've managed to do this about 300 times in the course of about a decade.
Wow.
So I'm getting very fast, right? So typical projects take only a couple months. They don't consume a huge amount of my time or the client's time, so I can make huge changes very quickly. One of the reasons I can do that is because I've learned and practiced and screwed up a lot and got back up again in a whole lot of conversations. And that's what I wrote the book about, how you use conversations effectively to make significant changes in your organization, and how you can do that with tech people whose favorite conversation partner is a screen.
Right.
So how do you talk to them, and how do you help them talk to you?
How did you, or when did you realize that you, unlike many of your development brothers and sisters, actually could do the conversation thing? I grew up in software, and not all developers, as you said, even like talking to people, much less understand the power that conversations can hold.
I've had them tell me, I went to this industry precisely because I wouldn't have to talk to anybody. And you're asking me to talk to people. Squirrel, what's wrong with you? So actually, the time I realized it is after years and years and years of practice, because my ability to have conversations was not any better than anyone else's, until I decided, inspired by the work of a very clever person named Chris Argyris, to really practice intensively getting better at this type of activity, because I saw how much it was costing me, that I couldn't interact well with, say, the CFO, who would say, what's your OpEx and your CapEx, and why are these people costing so much, and can't we outsource them all to Remotistan? And I wouldn't have a great response to that, because half of the words I didn't know, and the other half didn't seem that interesting, and I didn't know how to work with a person in some other part of the organization effectively. And I'm sure you guys see this all the time. You see it in all different parts of the organization. People talk very different languages and can't build trust with each other. So I recognized that problem, and I didn't have anything I could do with it. I couldn't figure out anything about it until one guy, a very clever guy called Benjamin Mitchell, started talking with me. It actually started on Twitter and then in person. And he had he was also a coder, but he had this completely different approach to the world. And he was interested in asking very difficult but genuine questions. And he would ask what words meant. And he had a whole kind of rigorous process for doing this. And I said, where the heck did you get this? He said, well, I read these old dusty books by this completely impenetrable social scientist. I mean, do not read this guy's books. They're completely unintelligible. But luckily, he had some followers who made it much more easy to understand. So Argyris came up with all these techniques that are really appealing to anybody, but particularly appealing to us engineers or people in finance or other folks who are very analytical, who want a step-by-step process. So, for example, one of the chapters in the book goes through what I call test-driven development for people. Test-driven development is a step-by-step process for engineers to write code. There's a method for that guides you through a trust-building conversation. And so I used those ideas from Argyris, gave them new names, worked with my co-author to figure out good ways to present them, and so on. And that's what's throughout the book is the fruit of many years of very conscious, very rigorous, very painful practice at improving conversations and using techniques like these so that you can actually improve how you're interacting with other people in the business.
I love that. So, it's interesting. In reading through the book, you use a lot of nomenclature from software development. Because, there are so many principles that apply. And, Ruby and I, we do workshops together and we talk about the power of the retrospective, right? That's just the part of the process that is standard. We look back always, whether it goes well or whether it doesn't go well, because corporate entities are really good at looking back when things go awry. Something goes wrong, they do a post-mortem. And I always ask clients, so what has to happen for there to be a post-mortem? Your patient has to mortem, and that's a bad thing. And then I'll always ask, is there power in looking back when we crushed it? And they say, well, yeah, of course. And then I ask, why don't we ever do that? Because we're busy and there's too much to do, and we tick the box and we move on. And that's sort of a basic building block. But what I liked about your approach is it breaks it down into conversations. And conversations, I mean, it's a big thing. And it's not just a thing that happens naturally. You talk about conversations being a practiced skill. So why should I, as a developer, why should I invest in my skill as a conversationalist? Like what's in it for me?
And I'll even sharpen that. One question I often get is, I already know how to have conversations. Yes. I'm having one with you right now. Why should I learn? And I get that from everybody, not just developers. But I wonder, did any of you watch the Paris Olympics?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And did you notice the race walkers? These folks who walk in a very unusual way. If you haven't seen it, check out a video because it looks so weird.
The people at the mall before it opens.
You got it, yeah, but even more, and they have to follow these very specific rules, and they have judges who stand next to them and make sure that they don't put their feet in the wrong place and so on.
Right.
So they are very highly developed and very highly trained walkers who walk faster than most of us could run. So they have refined the art of walking to a very high level. Now, why did they do that? All of us learned to walk when we were 2 years old, right? So why would we do anything different? Well, because you can be incredibly fast and incredibly artful and entertaining to people. Thousands of people turn out and line the course and watch these people moving at incredible speeds because that's inspiring and exciting and interesting. And similarly, if we deliberately practice doing things that are not natural, just like race walking, it's not the way we learned to walk when we were kids, but it's a very interesting and creative and useful way to get someplace fast. And similarly, you can get places much more quickly. You can get to the places you want to go. You can make your retrospectives much more effective if you practice some things that aren't natural. And that means you have to train your brain and train your mouth and your ears to work in a different way.
I love that. You in the open to the book, you talk about conversations as being humanity's secret weapon. And you hooked me in because you reference Harari's book, Sapiens, and Daniel Dennett's book. Why are conversations our special power? Why are they so important? Why do we need to leverage that power?
Well, because a conversation gives you a unique way of collaborating with other people. Just imagine if you were going to do anything you do in your business, but you had to do it without having any conversations. You couldn't have chat in Slack. You couldn't have emails. You couldn't have Zoom calls. You couldn't have meetings in rooms with whiteboards. You could probably manage it. There would be a way for you to point and draw pictures and sort of generally communicate that, we better deal with this bug or this problem or whatever it is that needs doing next to run your business. But man, it would be very painful. It would be a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah.
The problem is that once we've mastered something that's kind of okay, sometimes just being natural, lazy humans, we don't then tune that up and try to make it something that's even better. So for a very long time, people got round by walking and riding horses and doing whatever kind of came naturally to them that they could figure out. But then somebody came along with this cool idea that if you got sort of circular stuff and you sort of made it the right shape and you stuck it on another long thing, you could make something that would go around faster and you could get where you were going a lot more quickly. That was an unnatural thing to do, but it was building on what people were already doing. So the way I look at it is we're already using conversations all the time and in a vital way. We could not operate without that skill, and animals and all kinds of creatures that exist in very highly developed and organized communities, termites, chimpanzees, they don't have that ability. But we just use what comes to us naturally without trying to tune it up any further. And I think we should invent some wheels.
I love it.
I have a question. So with your consulting and what you've learned along the way and being faster and faster at doing this, how big of an impact did the pandemic have on your technique or your strategy or your time frame in working with companies? Did it matter or did it not matter?
It mattered hugely, and it made it much more effective, and I was able to get much faster, much more quickly, and help a lot more people. Because suddenly we did have to act unnaturally. The pandemic, and I think this might be your origin story here in this group, forced us all to be on screens like this. And that is an unnatural activity, right? Yep. So I'm sure you do. I'm watching you guys do this, and I certainly do it. We're miming more, we're exploring the space around us here, but it's a box, right? So I can't,
That's right.
I can't show you my legs. I promise I'm wearing trousers, but
we don't even care.
I'm sure you don't. None of us care. But that's the whole point. Is instead of being sort of the natural way of showing up to a meeting, looking at the agenda, interacting with people around us, surreptitiously looking at our phones, all the things that people do in person, we suddenly had to behave in a new way. And so it was a lot easier, I think, for people to appreciate this. And it's entertaining. The book came out actually a couple months into the pandemic. So the book tour didn't happen, right? Well, that was not part of our promotion. But people were really interested in doing things in a very different way. So I actually think it smoothed the way a bit because people were ready for something different.
Yeah.
The whole necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Exactly.
Or force people to look at things differently.
We always say constraints aid innovation. And
certainly.
It was an overnight constraint. Go home and now figure that out.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the book, the book is broken into two sections. Part one is kind of the setup and makes all the parallels to things that would resonate with engineers, developers, and those more introverted type folks. But part two breaks down a set of conversations, and there are 5 of them. And I'm curious, like these, when conversation is the skill to be leveraged here, there's a lot of signal and a lot more noise. I mean, we could name 100 different types of conversations. You have 5. I'm curious as to how you landed on these and why are these the ones that we should really, I'm assuming, start with here.
And what it gives you is a structure to get from incoherent, incapable, unartful interaction with your colleagues, unproductive conflict. And that starts by building trust, for example, as the first conversation. And then you finish with accountability. So by the time you get all the way through from trust to fear to buy to commitment and accountability, by the time you get to accountability, you're really functioning well. And you have a way of checking in on what someone else is doing, making sure you're aligned, doing that very frequently, doing that in a structured way. But you need all the previous steps to get there. Now, we also cheated. Because we'd read a book called The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by a chap named Lencioni. Mm-hmm. And when I finished that book, I threw it across the room because I was so frustrated. What happens in Lencioni's book is he lays out a similar series of conversations. We stole most of it from him, and we give him all the credit. We certainly admit that in the book. But the problem is that for everyone, he tells you a beautiful story. It's all fit together. It's lovely. It's really clear. And he tells you how to diagnose the dysfunctions of your team. And then he doesn't tell you anything about what to do about them.
Right.
And actually, I went and looked, and I thought, man, I went and picked it up from across the room, months or years later. And I said, okay, I got to look at this. What does he actually tell you? For trust, he tells you to go on a ropes course. And I'm sure that's really effective. If any of you have used ropes courses in your work, I'm sure you could tell me how great they are. I don't think that's the sole and only way that you're going to build trust with your team, or we would all have ropes in our offices. Right. So it seemed to us that there must be some better ways, and that's what we've been studying, Jeffrey and I, for a very long time, as I was telling you in the beginning there. So that practice then led us to have some answers to what you should do, and some nice step-by-step tools, which sometimes I call it conversations for dummies. It's very clear what to do next. And that appeals to everybody, not just developers. So I don't want people to feel I can't read this book or it won't be helpful to me if I'm not a coder. That's not true at all. It'll certainly help you with some tools to talk to engineers because you can use some language that might be meaningful to them. But I've had people tell me that it helps them in all kinds of areas in their business. And certainly I coach outside technology and I use the techniques for that as well.
Yeah. It's a good thing. I love that it starts with trust, just like Lencioni. It's the base of the pyramid. The other conversations that you mentioned, we mentioned them briefly, but I'll just say them slowly so people can hear them. Trust is where it starts. Then it moves to fear, why, commitment, and it wraps with accountability. Once we've got this, sort of modicum baseline trust, tell us about fear conversations. What are those and why are they important?
Well, so one of the things that people often say about fear is I want to get rid of it. So I can imagine this is something that you encounter in HR a lot. There's some new thing happening. You're moving into a new market. You're shifting structure. You're doing something. Yep. People are afraid, and you think, how can I get rid of the fear? Well, where's my magic button? What's my magic wand that can make the fear go away? But you guys have all been around the block enough to know that you can't get rid of the fear. Fear is not going to disappear, and actually, it wouldn't be healthy if it did. All the people who many millennia ago were fearless about things that were happening around them, didn't sort of hear something in the bushes and think, oh, that's a lion. They thought, might be a yummy rabbit I could catch and I can eat the rabbit. Those people who went over to the bushes, they got eaten. So they're not around. Yeah, we don't have them. We don't have them to look at. The people who survived are the ones who ran away, who went up the nearest tree and got away, and that was healthy for them. That fear is a good, healthy, positive response, and you're not going to get rid of it. So what we talk about in the book is removing, mitigating that fear, not removing it, looking for the signs of it, which are things like people avoiding conversations, avoiding problems, hiding them, and there are certain things you can't name. One of my favorites, this just came up last week, is the passive voice. Mm-hmm. So I was coaching someone and working with him, and he kept saying, yeah, we weren't allowed to do that. The new strategy said we couldn't do that. And we heard that we couldn't do it, and it wasn't allowed. I said, who the heck is this person? Who are they? Where are they? And it turned out it was an actual person. And the person was in the building. So I got the person to come over, and the person didn't think any of those things, didn't want any of that stuff, hadn't said to do that. None of that was actually true. And if they'd gone over to that person and said, hey, are you doing all this stuff? They would have said, what are you talking about? We don't want to do that at all. So they had the fear that this person had these negative intentions with the changes they were bringing and so on. And the fear turned out to be completely unfounded, and I could mitigate it. They still had the fear because they hadn't spoken to that person very much. So it became an ongoing conversation, which will continue to reduce the fear. But by bringing the fear to light, sort of when you're afraid of needles or spiders or something, you spend some time with those things and you learn not to be afraid of them, but to be less afraid in a similar way. Greater exposure and greater understanding tends to mitigate the fear and reduce it so you can actually operate.
Yeah, you sort of normalize those things. It's funny. We say a lot in the work that we do, in a world of imperfect information, we write the endings to the story, right? Our brains don't like uncertainty. We like to know where to file things in there. So we write the ending to the story, and left to our own devices, we typically write stories that are personal in some way and negative, right? We also
that's what helped our ancestors survive. They ran away from the bushes.
We tell the saber-toothed tiger story in our emotional intelligence workshop, right? Because that's, evolutionarily, it's what our brains gave us the best chance at survival for, right?
Yep.
And then we talk about teams and high-performing teams, and one of the tenets of a high-performing team is a willingness to have the hard conversations. We call it discussing the undiscussables. And when you got those two things working together, I'm writing stories and they're pretty crappy stories, and we've got some tough conversations to have. That makes it pushing a wet noodle up a hill. It's a hard task.
Mm-hmm. Would you like to know a technique for dealing with that?
Yes.
Okay.
I would like to know a technique for dealing with that.
So this technique is called coherence busting. And coherence, you alluded to it. It's a concept from Kahneman, who popularized it in Thinking Fast and Slow. There's a bunch of psychological studies on System 1 and System 2, these methods of thinking. But the key item is that exactly when you write the ending to the story in that natural negative way, your brain assumes that it knows what the right answer is,
right,
and gives you a coherent story, which sounds really right to you. Mm-hmm. And coherence busting is all about first noticing that that's happening. So when you're really sure, that's the point when you need to undermine your own assumptions.
Yeah.
If this feels like race walking, feels very unnatural, you got it. This is the right thing, right? It's like running without lifting your feet. So you take something you're really sure about and you undermine it, and you undermine it in multiple inconsistent ways. So, for example, if as this person was writing the end of the story, so, this person's, the other people are out to get me. They're making a stupid strategy. They're selling stuff we can't sell. They have negative intent. And so what this person might do is instead think of multiple really inconsistent ideas, as many of them as silly and funny as possible, because when your brain, your neurons operate differently when you're in humor mode, when you're laughing, and it's harder to have this sort of coherent assumption. So I'll often say, aliens are controlling this person's brain, and the aliens are out to undermine our business as part of their takeover of the world. And so it's not this person's fault, it's the aliens controlling their brain. Now, you guys laughed. That's good, because it's very unlikely to be true. If it were, it'd be really interesting. But it is
right.
We
don't know, Squirrel. We don't know.
It's consistent with the facts, right? The facts as known are, I heard this stuff and I'm supposed to do it, but I don't know where it's coming from or why. And it could be aliens. Now, it could also be other things. It could be the board of directors who have made some assumptions and dictated some policy. And then yelling at this person isn't going to help me at all because I got the wrong person. So I got to take a different action. And it could be simply that this person has a difficult plan, is doing it the best they can, but really doesn't understand some of the constraints. Now, that's a kind of nice explanation. And it's the simplest of them, but it's not the one that makes you laugh. It's not the one that really undermines you the most. So you really want disparate, complex ones. The person is secretly working for another company. They got a new job. They're trying to undermine us because they're working for a competitor, right? Anything you can think of, and you try to come up with as many of those stories as you can, and you verify that they all match the facts. And when you know that, you're
We lost you there. Can't hear your audio.
I actually don't know, because there's all these explanations that all match the facts. And what would be much more effective is if I actually asked some questions and I found out whether any of these things might be true. Now, I don't generally tend to ask the one about aliens unless I preface it by saying, here's a joke. Useful to do, because if you can put yourself in that mindset, if you can think to yourself, how could I possibly have a different explanation for this? Then you're much more open to actual explanations, which often are quite surprising and quite valuable.
Well, and it also
that's the coherence busting process.
And it seems like that makes it less scary to ask questions, right? Like
exactly.
It's not intimidating to want to clarify something because you're like, actually, there could be a lot of different things going on here. I should probably check it out. And you can formulate questions based on those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It opens you to new possibilities, so it's easier to ask questions that aren't closed. Because one of the other things we talk about is genuine questions, right? We were all watching some legal stuff. Some famous person was having some legal trouble earlier this year, and he was getting asked questions, and he was asking his accusers various kinds of questions. They were all very closed questions. Were you there on this day? Were you doing this? Were you in the lift, the elevator at this time? All that kind of stuff. And none of them were, gee, could you surprise me with something new? Could I learn something different? As we're recording this, we just had a debate between that guy and somebody else. And again, they didn't ask any of those kinds of questions. They didn't say, gee, could you tell me about your immigration policy? That's actually a good idea. Could I join your party? Right? That didn't happen. I didn't watch it, but I know it didn't happen. Whereas in business, we would do much better to ask those kinds of genuine questions that might give us surprising answers. And when we're closed and we're thinking in that coherent form and we've come up with the answer and our brains have written the end of the story, we're not in a mode to ask those kind of questions. We're going to ask more lawyerly, leading questions.
Right.
But exactly as Lori says, we could get into the mode, if we use coherence busting, where we're ready to ask surprising questions, where we're ready to debate and discuss and be surprised by something we didn't know.
And that's also a lot easier if you have any level of trust.
Trust, yeah.
Right.
Which is why trust comes before fear. You got it.
Absolutely. Yep.
So, Ruby, you mentioned in the chat, something that's very similar to what we call the 1% truth. Talk a little bit about the question that you ask of the people that you're coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's totally aligned with the coherence busting is, coaches will come in and they'll, even bottom line a story and talk for a couple minutes about all these things. And they're really spun up about it. And I'm like, okay, time out. What's really, really, really true here? Like really true. Like, what do you know with your whole heart and soul and body that this thing actually happened? And they'll trim it down, and sometimes they know nothing.
There are no facts.
Or I saw this person pass a folder to this person.
Oh,
I mean, yeah. Or yes, yeah.
So I'll just give you another way just to add to your arsenal there. It sounds like you have great questions to ask. Another one you can ask is, what would a video camera record?
Ooh, I like that.
What did you actually see and hear?
Yeah.
And when you can get them to that point, they'll often say something like, yeah, I saw these two people talking. And what they were talking about was their plan and their mission to undermine our whole strategy. And, they're messing it all up and they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
But the only thing they saw was the two people talking.
So.
Totally. And I love too what you just added, this piece about, after they've kind of broken it down. I love this thing that I've never really thought about is, well, what questions do you want to go back and ask to help them move forward? How do you want to be in that situation? And I wrote down freaking curiosity, man. I have written down curiosity in so many of the corporate bartender conversations we've had. It's so fucking important.
Yeah, for sure.
And I don't think we're good at it. So I imagine that you have, what are your kind of top tips for curiosity, or how do you get people remaining curious, or even
or just
beginning?
Remember to be curious, right?
Like, oh yeah. I don't know everything.
So I'll tell you, we're kind of going backwards through the book, which is completely fine. I don't mind that at all. I'm happy to go anywhere you guys want. But one of the key core techniques is, and I keep coming back to the race walking analogy, those folks have to go out on tracks and go walk around and have people tell them, you're not doing it right, and they take videos of themselves and they watch them and say, oh man, I lifted my foot there, I shouldn't, and they're learning as rapidly as they can by iterating very quickly and learning what they are doing, observing it very closely and improving. Well, guess what? You can do that with conversations. And there's a whole technique in the book. I won't go into every detail of it. But basically what you do is you write down what you were saying, what you and the other person actually said. Again, you're thinking, what would a video camera record? You're only writing what actually happened in the world, the actual sound waves moved into your ears. And on the other side, so you do this on the right-hand side in columns, and on the left-hand side, you write down thoughts and feelings. Now I have to check, is anybody here telepathic?
Nope.
No telepaths. Okay. I keep hoping, I had one person say, yeah, well, I knew you were going to ask that. So, I keep hoping that someone will be able to prove to me that they're telepathic. And then I have a great, whole bunch of great business ideas for them go into partnership. But since most of us are likely not telepathic, you can only write down what you were thinking and feeling, because only you can know that. And people will very frequently mess this up by doing exactly as Ruby said. They're sure they know what they really, really know. The other person, no, you don't know that they were thinking. You might have a strong hypothesis, but you don't know.
Yeah.
And so if you write down your conversation, then you can do all kinds of tests. Once you get this written down, you can do things, and we have a whole bunch of them in the book. But the very most basic one, the simplest thing you can do immediately to improve curiosity, is to go through and circle all the question marks. And typically I find one of two things which signal lack of curiosity, because almost everybody has insufficient curiosity. Either they go through and circle all the question marks and they don't make any circles because there ain't any question marks. Nobody ever asked any questions. And therefore, that's a pretty strong signal that you're not being very curious. Mm-hmm. Or they say, yeah, I've circled all kinds of questions. They're great. And they're all on the left-hand side. They all stayed inside the person's head. Why is this person doing this? Why do they think this is a good idea? Why are they telling me about this? But they never say, What they actually say is stuff like, "Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, we should definitely pursue that. I'm looking forward to getting started on that." Where actually they're thinking, "This is the dumbest idea. Why have they ever come up with this?" Yeah, but it all stays in the left-hand column.
Yeah.
So once you've written it down, you've circled your question marks or not because you don't have any. You can also check to see which ones are genuine questions, because some of them might be questions like, "This is the greatest idea ever, and we really should pursue it," right? That's not a genuine question. You don't really get credit for that one. But if you show up and say, "What could go wrong with this?" And, I'd really like to learn how it would work for you and whether, where are the pitfalls and difficulties that you see, then you get credit for that one. If you don't have any of those, and you probably don't in the difficult conversations that you're having, then you can go back and revise. You get out your red pen, you start putting in something else, and you say, "Okay, I could have asked this question here. I could have brought this from the left-hand side to the right-hand side." And then you go and practice that with somebody. So you get 8-year-olds are great at this because they love embarrassing adults. But you could use anybody. You could use a mirror if you need to. And you have the conversation, but with your red marks inserted, with your questions put in. So that's a specific exercise you can do to improve your curiosity. But it takes a while. You have to do a bunch of these, and you'll continue to say, "Oh man, I did it wrong. I didn't ask. I missed it here." But you'll start to have triggers. You'll start to have tells. You'll start to be able to say, "Oh, this is a place where I'm not being curious enough. I have to stop. Hang on a minute. No, don't answer that question. It wasn't really a good question. Let me try again. What could go wrong with this?"
It's that building of the muscle memory, right? I work with a lot of people and they try. It's so funny. It's like going to the gym in January. They try a thing one time and it doesn't work. And they're like, "Well, that didn't work. That was trash." And they move on. It's that repeated application, right? Until that
and improvement, because the failure is great. It gives you tons of material.
Right.
My co-author Jeffrey's amazing. When we would hold, you were talking about retrospectives. We'd hold retrospectives when he and I worked together in the same company, and we'd say, "Oh, we didn't get to this part, and we didn't understand that, and we didn't even talk about the monitoring and why we didn't get." He'd say, "Don't worry, because we didn't get there, we won't fix it." You'd say, "But that's the problem. We didn't fix it." He said, "Yeah, that means it'll happen again, so we can hold another retrospective."
Yeah.
I mean, what a great perspective, right? I mean, again, it's sort of mitigating that fear response. I want to touch on a couple more strategies here, or a couple more of these conversations in the few minutes that we have left. The next conversation is why, and we know why is important, right? Simon Sinek tells us all about why is important. And communications experts tell us to be careful with why questions because it puts people on the defensive. So talk to us about the why conversation, because when I read that, when I skimmed the table of contents, I'm like, ooh, that's a flag for me, because I know it's good and I know you have to do it eloquently. And sometimes I'm not super eloquent. So talk to us about the why conversation.
What I'd recommend is doing it less eloquently. So if you do it too eloquently, you get in trouble. There's a great study, and I've never been able to find it again. So if any of you recognize it, please tell me. I'd be really interested. But I remember reading it, and it was about how slide decks evolved within a company. So you'd start with a slide deck that was quite strong. It would say, "We've heard about a new idea. We should implement this new Agile framework. We should go into Mexico," whatever it was. And it would be quite strong. It'd be somebody who was a visionary who was trying to get their idea across. Then when it got up to board level, it would be much more questioning. It would be much, "We think that this possibly might be a good idea. We're kind of thinking about it. We're kind of considering it." But that's backwards. It's much better to be less certain with the people who are on the ground, who can say, "We don't even have a way to deliver our customer service in Spanish. So, how are we going to sell in Mexico again?
We should hold on.
Maybe we should do some other fundamental work, and maybe Canada. I hear they speak English there." So that if you can get that ground information and be more questioning and less eloquent, less driving, less visionary, you actually get better results. So there's a whole process that we describe in there called joint design. I won't go through every detail of it, but basically what you want to do is include all the people, including the opponents. And in fact, you want as many opponents as you can get, as many people who are going to have disparate views, who are going to see it from a different perspective, who are going to say, "Hang on, that won't work here in Singapore," whatever it is. You want those people in the room and you want to draw out their opinions. Mm-hmm. But also what you want to have is a clear decision-making rule. So what you don't do is say, oh, well, okay, we're just going to debate this until the end of time, because then you never get anywhere. Yeah. So if you follow these techniques and these rules, you get to a decision quite quickly. And what you never have, or you never have if people are being honest, if you have the trust that you need before this, you never have somebody saying, well, they didn't ask me. I mean, I knew this was going to fail. And I'm not going to try to help it because I know it's going to fail. And I'm just going to wait till they figure it out and then I'll go away. They say, well, actually, they asked me and I told them and they said what they're going to do to mitigate it. And they're going ahead anyway. I still don't agree, but they definitely consulted me. I was definitely part of it. And, one thing I'll often do at the end of one of these sessions is I'll go around the room and I'll say, are you willing to try this for 2 weeks? Mm-hmm. And I'll promise everyone that if it doesn't work, I will buy them a beer. And particularly in England, this works very well because we love beer. Australia, it works well too. But
works well in Colorado, my friend. I tell you
excellent.
That right now.
Yeah, you guys have some pretty good craft beers there, I've heard. But in fact, I've never had to buy anybody a beer because the process was good enough that we haven't produced anything that's a complete rubbish. We made lots of mistakes. We don't make the right decision. We don't get to the right thing, and we refine it. But you've got everybody included, and so you have a much better chance of actually getting to a result. So less eloquence actually gets you better results.
Yeah.
It's funny, when you were talking about joint design, it made me remember that there's a story that you tell in the book about when you open the case for joint design, and it's called Adding Your Own Egg, and it's about cake mix. Can you quickly tell the cake mix story? Because it's an awesome story and it's hilarious.
It's a fabulous story. And it's really true. I had to go check. I thought it was one of those consultant stories people just told at, after dinner speeches. It's really true. I have pictures of the actual cake mix. So somebody invented cake mix at some point, and it was a cake mix that was so good that all you had to do was add water to this powder and you got a cake. And it didn't sell. And this is about the 1930s, so I have to tell this in a gendered way. I apologize. That's just how the world was in 1935.
There's so many asterisks in the book.
Yeah, it's like, we don't really need this. It's not how it is. It's not how it should have been. But in the main people they were selling to were housewives at that time. And so some smart person said, we invented this great stuff. Let's go ask some housewives why they aren't buying it. And the answer they got back was, I don't feel like I'm doing anything. Right. I didn't participate in this. It's not me baking a cake. Why don't I just go buy one? Right. So what's the point? And then some very clever person listened to that very carefully and said, you know what? We can make sure that the housewife is participating in making the cake and then they'll like it more. And so what they did is they took out the egg powder. And so and the actual cake mix said in big bold letters on the front of it, add your own egg. And that sold like hotcakes, right? Sold very, very rapidly because you really were contributing. Now, when you have someone add their own egg, you can't make it fake. So if it had been that, you just had to have, say special words or something, it was just some magic thing that didn't actually affect the cake, that wouldn't have worked because people would know. They'd see through that. And they'd say, I'm still not adding anything. This is just an exercise. And you guys have all been through that. I'm going to do a listening tour. And someone just pretends to listen for a long time, then goes and does whatever they want. So you have to make sure that it's genuine adding of a real egg, because if you get a bad egg or you put it in wrong, you get some shell in there, you're going to mess up the cake. So it really does matter. But it's still a heck of a lot easier than getting all the ingredients and stirring them and doing all the whole work. So you actually get more out of it. And you get to add your own egg because then you can say it's my cake. I participated. I made it. So that's the add your own egg story. And that's what you want to look for in this joint design process. That the people who are participating, those opponents who you dragged into the room, who you're trying to pull the information of, the quiet people in the back who know why this is a stupid idea, you incorporate what they told you. Even if you go ahead with something that you were planning, you say, that's a very important egg. We need to do this differently. I want you to be in charge of that.
Well, and I love how you married that up with having a really clear decision-making process or criteria defined as to how we'll make the decision, because that happens in innovation and brainstorming. And, everybody comes together with all their great ideas and somebody puts it on a flip chart and somebody types it up and distributes it.
Nothing happens. Just dissipates like fog.
Right.
We had a big thunderstorm here in Miami, and there was lots of storm and lots of thunder, no rain.
Yeah.
Nothing actually happened. It looked great, but it just went.
Or you end up with people participating who think that they're going to have more say in the decision making than was ever intended. And so if you don't clarify those expectations up front, then they feel offended because they didn't actually get to be part of the decision making, or they whatever. But so all of that, setting things up correctly to, kind of the rules of engagement are super important about.
You're going to add an egg. You're not grinding the flour.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So all of these conversations sort of build towards accountability, and accountability is motherhood, baseball, apple pie. It's a platitude. It is on posters in lobbies around the world, right? It is such a buzzword.
Almost never actually followed.
Yeah.
Except the worst kind is I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm going to go and tell you, Eric, this is why you were wrong. You did it wrong. You're bad. This is terrible. Makes me want to hide under the desk.
That's right.
And that's not the accountability you want.
So it's either corporate buzzword bingo, or it is out there trying to find the single throat to choke, which is a piece of vernacular from a company that I used to work for. Single throat to choke. In the book,
I heard that today.
Did you?
At work.
Yikes. Yep. So in the book, you have a little sidebar called Medieval Accountability, and it's sort of
I was hoping you were going to ask me about that. It's one of my favorite things. I had to fight with the publisher to put it in.
I loved it.
It comes from about 1450 when my house was built. So there was a king who wanted to establish a way to get taxes. And so he had these people called sheriffs, not the kind with the 6-pointed star and the guns. It's a little earlier than that. These are the people who came before that.
They're the people that Robin Hood robbed.
Yes, Sheriff of Nottingham, exactly. There was fighting with them and robbing the rich. So the sheriff's job was to get taxes out of the people and bring it to the government. But you didn't get a check, right? You didn't do a transfer with your Venmo or something. You got actual bags of pennies at that time, silver pennies. And so the sheriff once a year would turn up at the exchequer and would put down the pennies and account. This is where we get the accounting word. Would account by essentially counting using essentially a checkerboard. We're not quite sure how they did it, but they used a checkerboard to kind of keep track of which pennies went with which shire and how it was all put together. But they would account for, actually in this shire, we had a really bad drought, and so we didn't collect as much taxes. And in this other one, we were able to collect all the taxes. This is how much we were owed. This is how many farms I went to. And if you didn't get this right, you had your head chopped off because you were probably, taking the pennies yourself. So
fairly accountable there at that point.
They didn't deal with the fear. Didn't do so much mitigation of fear here. But the way we get this notion of accountability is the idea of coming to someone else and saying, here's what I did. And here's how it happened. Here's what went well. Here's what didn't. Here's all the information. So it's being accountable. And what we have in the book is processes and tools for helping people to be accountable to you frequently. I mean, they could only do it once a year. You have to ride on a horse for several days to get to London to do this. But, we have a few other techniques now and methods that allow us to be much more frequent in our accountability. And it's most important that it comes from the person. It's not I'm holding you accountable, but I'm giving an account.
Right. So, I mean, the book is awesome. There's so much goodness in there. Squirrel, if we want to learn more about you, about the book, to get the book, where do we find you on the interwebs?
Super. So first of all, where you find me is douglassquirrel.com. So that's where you can learn all about me. I have links to the bits about the house and the work I do in the 300 different companies on 7 continents that I work with. So loads of information about me there. But I think what might be even more interesting to people listening here is a community I run of thousands of executives around the world who are tech and non-tech. I come from tech, but I work with a lot of people who aren't tech, trying to make a profit out of their technology. They're throwing all this money in there. And how do you actually know what the return is on your technology investment? And so that's called squirrelsquadron.com. So if you think of squirrel, my name, and squadron like a bunch of fighters flying through the sky, That's
I'm
what
picturing
it is.
flying squirrels
SquirrelSquadron.com.
now, actually.
When it was actually a community member who came up with the name, and I said, I'm going to hear a lot about flying squirrels for the whole time I'm going to be promoting this. But we have discussions and events very similar to this one, actually. We have a forum. I have weekly material that I send out. This is all free. It's my way of giving back. There's loads of material there, both on these kinds of conversations and on how to interact with your tech team, how to evaluate them. And it's very, very friendly to non-technical people. So if you're not a coder like me, you're very, very welcome. And it's a place for you to learn about conversations, improving your team, and making more from your technology. So DouglasSquirrel.com and SquirrelSquadron.com. And one last thing I'll say. You guys have listened to all this and you've been very patient, wonderful questions, and interested. If anybody wants a copy of the book, just go to either of those, get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to send you a signed copy.
Whoa.
Awesome. That's very generous.
I mean, come on.
I don't mind at all. But don't tell my publisher I said that. I'm not supposed to, but, I don't care.
Yeah, publishers don't like that. But we don't work for them, do we, Squirrel?
Right.
No, we don't.
No, we don't. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. This has been a fantastic conversation. Like I said, I love the book. I think there's a lot to be gained from it. So much tactical takeaway, usable things, right? And you don't have to read it like a novel. You can bounce back and forth, right? You can jump into areas that pop out to you. I mean, that's how I read it. And I think anytime you dip into it, you're going to find at least one or two nuggets that you could use. So I'm going to give you one more round of applause. Thank you for being here with us today. We're going to do our end of show ritual, our funny things, our good feel story, and then we're going to go have some dinner. So things that made Eric laugh on the internet this week. Sometimes when you get vanity plates, you should be thoughtful, because this does not say a new start to me. That says anus tart for you, those of you listening. And I don't know what that is, but I'm not sure that I want to know what that is. From the We've All Thought It, and Lori and I have had this conversation, and I know this picture because it's in Newark. Who exactly are airport shops for? Like, imagine going, oops, I forgot to grab a Prada bag and a Rolex that I totally need for my flight.
Bored much?
And it's like the high-end luggage stores. Like, you're at the airport and you're like, my bag sucks. I need a Toomey bag. I'm going to go pay $2,000 for this bag right now.
Repack it here in the middle of this.
Concourse B. Yeah. I don't get it. I think we can all relate here. If we have any sort of grammar police vein in our body, I can look past most of your flaws. Emotionally distant, okay. Slight drinking problem, fine. Killed a man once due to circumstances you can't talk about, whatever. But saying I seen instead of I saw,
oh my God,
I won't tolerate. Right?
Yeah. I got some of those around me.
Yeah. And all of us on this call right now ride a lot of airplanes. And so when you see this picture, you'll have a reaction, but hear out the person making the argument here. You get on a plane and you find your seat next to this person. What do? The person says, I don't get it. This is like the number one best person to sit next to on a plane. Won't talk to you, won't touch you, won't get wasted. Definitely showered this morning. Probably won't play videos out loud on his phone. 10 out of 10. Ideal seatmate.
Can we please talk about playing videos out loud on your phone?
Oh my God.
I'm always like, can I help you? Connect your headphones. I'm like, give it to me.
That's funny.
So these last two, I've found a new funny internet thing that there's just scads of material. It is food items on a buffet stand that are mislabeled. And for some reason, they just make me laugh so hard. Like when you see Nugmet. But I spit out the coffee I was drinking when I came across Cheem creams.
Whoa.
Whoa.
Cheem creams. I don't know. I think the internet is a mysterious place, sometimes full of rage and anger, and sometimes full of joviality and laughing.
Oh man, that's funny.
Today's Good Feel story is about getting pulled over by a cop.
Finally tonight, you never know what event or person will change your life. CBS's Steve Hartman goes on the road for a story about a warning that turned into a blessing.
Bama.
And that, my friends, is the power of conversation. Right?
Standing.
Perfect setup.
Yeah.
Today's semi-quarantine cocktail, it's called No Free Munchies, buddy. You gotta do it in the Pauly Shore voice. No free munchies, buddy. It's a riff on a cocktail called the Munchie Punch. You're going to need a little añejo tequila. So apparently selling rec weed in Ohio is new, and some entrepreneurs wanted a nice launch. A little lime juice. Turns out it's illegal to give away or advertise free ice cream at dispensaries in Ohio. You're going to need an ounce of orange curacao, and they're now looking at a fine of $150,000. Little muddled mint. Oh, and you can't use the slogan, "Can you take me higher?" in Ohio either. You're going to garnish that with a little Thai basil and a watermelon cut in a heart slice there. And I wonder if they can charge for the ice cream. I don't know. And I'm nodding to my DC roots with another fun internet thing that I found that doesn't exist, referencing a Fugazi line. Ice cream eating motherfucker. That's what you are. It's a minor threat ice cream truck, and I wish that existed. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. I am so grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you to Squirrel for being here and sharing his wisdom. Go get that book. Have a great week, y'all. We will see you in 3 weeks. Go get some dinner.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyeteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyeteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you've always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.